June 20th, 2011. Moscow, Domodedovo Airport. It's slowly getting dark behind the terminal glass. The wet asphalt reflects the passing lights of tow trucks and the occasional flash of floodlights. RusAir 2134A Flight 9605 to Petrozavodsk is preparing for departure on the platform, the usual overnight charter ordered by Rusline. There are 52 people on board, 43 passengers and 9 crew members. Among those walking along the ramp is FIFA referee Vladimir Patai, returning home from Moscow after a business trip. People sit down calmly. Someone flips through the newspaper. Someone adjusts the seatbelt. No details yet indicate that this flight will be the last for most of them. The commander is Alexander Fedorov, 44 years old, an experienced, confident, self-reliant person. The co-pilot next to him is Sergei Karyakin, 40 years old, disciplined and accurate in his calculations. Navigator instructor Amandardy Ativ Sr., 50 years old, with dozens of flights on northern routes. Flight mechanic Viktor Timoshenko, who is already 56, is responsible for the technical condition. And 3 flight attendants, Yulia Gurina, Elena Yerofayeva, and Yulia Skvortsova, are preparing the cabin for departure. It's 22:30. The Tu-134A breaks away from the Domodedovo strip. With a slight jerk, it leaves into the night. Navigation lights are reflected in the clouds, and the Moscow arc is twinkling below. The plane is heading northwest, towards Petrozavodsk. The altitude is 9,150 meters. Smooth flight, stable flight level, almost no turbulence. While the passengers are dozing, the usual radio monotony sounds in the cabin. The dispatcher reports the weather forecast for the destination. Wind 120 degrees, 4 meters per second, visibility 3 kilometers, sometimes 1.5. Light rain, haze, the lower limit of clouds is 120 meters, sometimes up to 90. Petrozavodsk meteorologist warns the dispatcher. Deterioration is expected. We are preparing an adjustment to the forecast. But according to the procedure, the crew receives updated data only upon request. There was no request. Fedorov and Karyakin did not specify. An overnight flight, a slight delay of 20 minutes. It is better not to delay. The plane is en route. Everything is working normally. But somewhere ahead, behind the clouds and the cold northern air, the weather is already changing the rules of the game. It is she who, together with the decisions of the people in the cockpit, will determine the outcome of this night. As the liner hurtles through the darkness, a chain of events is emerging in the sky between Moscow and Karelia, which will lead step by step to the point of no return. The cabin of the Tu-134 has a cramped space, like a time capsule. Old-fashioned instruments, hands, scales, lamps, the smell of hot metal and kerosene. For people work almost synchronously, but there are subtle stresses inside this mechanism that are invisible from the outside. The crew commander, Alexander Fedorov, is a veteran of flights, 20 years in the sky. He's confident, sometimes too confident. There are no insurmountable weather conditions for him. There are only difficult ones. He is used to manual control, believes that automation is only an assistant but not a pilot. Next to him is Sergei Karyakin, the co-pilot. Younger, more careful, but also more dependent. He knows that it's useless to argue with Fedorov. According to the charter, he must ensure, in fact, obey. Navigator instructor Amandardy Ativ is the most senior member of the crew. He has a lot of experience, but in recent years he has been an instructor more often than a practicing navigator. On this night, he acts as both a mentor and a navigator. He controls the course, helps to adjust the trajectory, and does it confidently, sometimes even too actively, interfering in the commander's decisions. Later, experts will call this a shift in authority in the cockpit, when the commander actually reports to the navigator. But so far, it just looks like a well-coordinated effort. The 4th crew member is flight mechanic Viktor Timoshenko, a quiet professional. His area is motors, pressure, fuel, and mechanization. He monitors the readings, gives commands, releases flaps, and landing gear. Everything is according to the procedure, without emotions. They have one thing in common, the confidence that everything is under control. But it will become a trap. professionalism is blinding. When dozens of flights follow the same pattern, it seems that this one is just another one. None of them have a sense of risk. Meanwhile, the lights are already dimmed in the cabin. Passengers are packing for a night flight. Someone closes the window curtain, and someone is peering at the rare lightning behind the clouds. The navigator, wearing headphones, receives updated data from Petrozavodsk. Visibility is deteriorating, clouds are decreasing, but the lows are still within the normal range. According to the documents, you can fly. It feels like it would be better to clarify the forecast. Fedorov makes a decision. Let's continue. He doesn't even suspect that ahead is one of the most treacherous nights for flying over the north. Low clouds, layered haze, light rain and light from the ground, which confuses the pilot's eyes in the dark. When everything is the same gray, and the instruments do not provide a clear visual support, reality begins to float. Pilots call this condition a false horizon. It is there, in this gray-black vacuum, that Flight 9605 will soon begin to descend. The crew is confident, the dispatchers are calm, the passengers are asleep. But under these conditions, any incorrect calculation turns into an avalanche. First, there is a deviation of several degrees, then dozens of meters, and then something that can no longer be fixed. The night over Karelia was viscous and colorless. A layer of clouds stretched all the way to the horizon, as if someone had covered the earth with a steel lid. Petrozavodsk was preparing to receive Flight 9605, but the weather was already starting to behave unpredictably. According to the forecast, the wind is 120 degrees. For meters per second, visibility is 3,000 meters, sometimes up to 1,500. It's not a disaster for an experienced crew, just difficult weather conditions. But there was a trap hidden in these figures. The lower limit of the clouds was 120 meters, and in some places it was only 90. For the old Tu-134, this is almost the limit, because the standard operating minimum for such an aircraft is 165 meters in height and 3,500 meters in visibility. The weather forecaster on duty at Petrozavodsk Airport understood that things could get worse. He even alerted the dispatcher. I am preparing an adjustment to the forecast. There is a rapid deterioration. However, according to the current rules, such data is transmitted to the crew only upon request. But the request from Flight 9605 has not been received. Fedorov did not specify. He already had everything he needed: the route, heights, fuel calculation, approach scheme. Besides, the flight was delayed by 20 minutes, and the pilots did not want to waste time. Everything is calm at the echelon. Domodedovo dispatchers are monitoring, switching to the Petrozavodsk HSE frequency. The navigator is checking navigation, checking the drive beacons. Everything is in normal mode. But on Earth, the situation is changing. The northern air draws moisture to the lakes. Humidity increases, and the lower layer of clouds literally falls down. The haze thickens into fog. The distant drive beacon is barely visible from the runway, and the airfield lighting seems weak against the background of the lanterns of the neighboring village of Bezovets. The contrast that will play a role later. It is easier for the pilot's eye to grab a bright fire from the ground than a dim strip in front of him. While the liner is moving along the route, the Petrozavodsk HSE dispatcher, Sergei Shmatkov, is preparing a workplace. He receives information from the weather station and prepares to meet the flight. At 23:10, he broadcasts the latest data. The wind is 80 degrees, 2 meters per second. Visibility is 2,100 meters, continuous clouds. The lower limit is 140 meters. On the near drive, 200. The actual weather is already below RusAir's operational minimum, but officially still within the norms of the General Class C standard. Fedorov listens to the message, nods and confirms the reception. No further questions. No request for an alternate airfield. No clarification of the weather forecast. In the cockpit, everything looks calm, almost routine. But there is already an imbalance behind this routine. They are boarding in conditions under which landing should not be performed. The navigator repeats the parameters in his headphones. Wind, 80 visibility, 200, main, 140. Fedorov answers briefly, I accepted. We continue to decline. It is at this point that the decision about the future has already been made. Not consciously, not out loud, but firmly. Flight 9605 does not leave for a backup. He's going to Petrozavodsk. And ahead there is darkness, clouds, and a short section of the glide path, where a mistake of 5 seconds can cost everything. The crew of Flight 9605 is approaching Karelia. At an altitude of 9,150 meters, the liner is moving smoothly. The cabin is quiet. The instruments glow with a steady amber light. There was a black night overboard, clouds a solid carpet under the wings. Everything seems familiar, almost boring. 2320. The crew gets permission to descend. Commander Fedorov takes the plane down to 4,500 meters. Then the dispatcher allows it to pass to the transition level 1,500 meters. All actions according to the checklist. Navigator reports. Pressure is set. Drive beacons are set. Arc 1 and Arc 2 are ready. The mechanic confirms the operation of the engines, and the co-pilot keeps a log of heights and distances. Outside, the liner enters a dense layer of clouds. There is a slight vibration, raindrops hitting the fuselage. The steering wheel is getting a little heavier, and now every degree of deviation is physically felt. There is no visual orientation. Everything relies on instruments. At 2330, the dispatcher transmits the weather again. Temperature plus 15, visibility 2,100, cloud cover 130 meters on the main drive, 170 on the near drive. Fedorov listens, nods, but does not discuss with the team that these values are again below the operating minimum of RusAir. Just taking note, the plane continues to descend. At 900 meters, they are already in a dense cloud layer. The navigator notes the long range drive, the signal is stable. Further resolution is up to 500 meters. Still standard. But the navigation scheme entered into the system has one inaccuracy. The point of the fourth U-turn is 1.6 kilometers from the lane, and the required lead should be 3. It's a small thing, but that's where the discrepancies start. When the airliner exits the last turn, it turns out to be 4 kilometers to the left of the runway axis. The wind is blowing from the southeast up to 9 meters per second, and the car gradually moves to the right, compensating for the demolition. The navigator sees the deviation and gives the command, "Turn right, heading 30. The commander obeys. The mechanic releases the landing gear, then the flaps, first by 20 degrees, then by 30 degrees. At the same time, the liner unexpectedly rises slightly. The release of the flaps increased the lifting force, and Fedorov did not have time to compensate by deflecting the steering wheel. The altitude increases from 500 to 550 meters. The speed is 300 kilometers per hour, and the glide path is unstable. The distance is 500 meters to the traverse of the strip, the navigator reports. The plane is still not in the runway, but there was no panic in the cockpit. Fedorov is sure that he will have time to adjust it manually. He's used to it, he likes to feel the car. At 2337, the dispatcher authorizes the landing. Flight 9605, I allow landing. The answer is short and clear. The landing was allowed. The liner is undergoing long-range drive. The height is 385 meters, 55 above the norm. The navigator notices this and says, above the glide path, we're dropping 6 meters per second. The commander agrees. He increases the vertical speed, trying to return the aircraft to the calculated trajectory. On the instruments, everything looks under control, but in fact, the discrepancy has already begun. From now on, every second is a balance between precision and self-confidence. The descent gets a little steeper, the wind changes, and navigation shows that the runway is only 8 kilometers away. Nothing is visible below, only gray fog and occasional glimpses of light, where somewhere under the clouds, the lights of Petrozavodsk. The crew goes to them, believing that this is the beginning of the lane. But there is no stripe there. These are the lanterns of the village of Bezovets. 23:32. The plane passes the 2,700-meter mark. The commander turns off the autopilot via the side channel, switching control to manual mode. The Tu-134 is now completely in his hands. For Fedorov, this is a familiar state. He trusts himself more than the car. But on a night like this, automation could be the only cool-headed member of the crew. Manual piloting gives you a sense of control. The steering wheel is under the palms, the reaction to every movement. The reaction of the motors is instant. But in these clouds, human perception begins to deceive. When there is only a gray-black mass outside the window, the concept of a horizon ceases to exist. The navigator reports, "Airfield pressure is set. Drive beacons are ready." The mechanic replies, "Arc 1, Arc 2 are configured." Everything sounds technically perfect, but the tone of the conversations changes. The voices are a little more intense, the tempo is shorter, and the breathing is audible in the microphones. Fedorov smoothly moves the steering wheel, trying to align the 12 degrees magnetic course. The navigator corrects, "4 to the left, hold on." The liner reacts slowly and belatedly. The dense, humid air presses on the wings, and every movement requires effort. At an altitude of 1,500 meters, the crew reports to the dispatcher, "The transition is completed. The pressure is set." The formal answer is, "Understood. Continue the decline." The dispatcher does not see that the plane is already slightly off course. Everything looks fine on the instruments. Then there's silence on the air. Only the noise of fans, the hum of engines, and quiet conversations in the cabin. Fedorov takes a speed of 300 kilometers per hour, a vertical speed of 4 meters per second. The navigator keeps a close eye on the instruments, but at the same time he continues to look outside, hoping to see the lights of the strip. At an altitude of 900 meters, the liner emerges from another layer of clouds, and for a second lights flash below, weak, scattered. It would seem that the band, but it's not her. It's a light from a nearby village. The navigator says, "Lateral 4 to the left, we are heading." Fedorov adjusts the steering wheel. The flaps are released, the landing gear is lowered. The car is fully ready for landing. It's raining and hazy outside, and the occasional drop turns into long lines of light on the glass of the cabin. 23:36. The mechanic reports, "The chassis is released. 3 green lights are on." Fedorov answers, "Accepted. We're working on the glide path." But there are no glide paths. The instruments show that they are higher, and the landing system does not record the signal from the lighthouse. It is too weak, partially drowned out by humidity and terrain. Now Fedorov reduces the angle manually, according to the navigator's readings and visual guesses. The navigator says, "It's 500 meters to the entrance point of the glide path." The plane is still to the left of the runway axis, but they don't notice it, all the concentration is on altitude. The dispatcher says briefly, "Flight 9605, I allow landing." The crew's response sounds confident. Landing has been cleared. On the recording at this moment, you can hear the breathing of all 4 people. It is becoming more frequent. They enter the area where you need to see the approach lights, but there's only gray fog behind the glass. Fedorov raises his head, trying to catch at least some kind of landmark. The brain searches for light, shape, contrast. Nothing. And yet he decides to continue. The speed is stable, the altitude drops smoothly, the instrument readings seem reliable. It seems so far. In a minute, it is this sense of control that will turn into an illusion. The plane will be below the glide path, the course will go to the right, and the dispatcher will not have time to say anything else. 23:37. Flight 9605 enters the pre-landing zone. The aircraft is moving at a speed of 300 kilometers/h. Heading 15 degrees. Altitude about 500 meters. Everything looks clean on the instruments. The speed is stable, the RPM is normal, the radio communication is stable. But there is a hidden discrepancy behind these figures. When the liner passes the distant driving beacon, It goes 55 meters above the glide path. The navigator sees this and says, "Up 50, down 6. The commander answers calmly, "Understood. 6 vertically." It increases the angle of descent, sets a vertical speed of 6 meters per second. That's too much for a safe entry. But it seems to the crew that everything is under control. The Tu-134 is obedient, and if you sag a little, you can return to the correct profile. That's what thousands of pilots think. When the instruments almost match, on the edge between the norm and the risk, the descent accelerates, and now the plane no longer just returns to the glide path. It begins to cross it from top to bottom. The navigator sees the deviation and says, "Hold 6, 5 degrees to the left." Fedorov adjusts the course, but does not notice that the wind has already changed. The southeasterly current, which had previously carried the car to the left, has weakened, and now the liner is starting to move to the right of the runway axis. The slight deviation is only 6 degrees, but it's enough for the plane to be off the landing course after a couple of kilometers. At this moment, all the crew's attention is focused on altitude. They monitor the rate of descent, the instruments, and the mechanics' reports, but no one controls the course position. The reference points are 0. Visually, there is only gray fog. The navigator says, "Removal 4, control 220. These figures sound confident, but in fact the liner is going well below the calculated trajectory. The rate of descent is 5.5 meters per second. With the required 4, Fedorov looks ahead, hoping to see the lights. Psychologically, this is a moment of tension. The brain is waiting for confirmation, but the devices do not provide visual support. In such a situation, pilots often experience the illusion of upward movement. It seems to them that the plane is rising, and they push the steering wheel forward even more. The decrease is increasing. The co-pilot notices the pace and cautiously says, "It's a little too much vertically." Fedorov does not answer. He is sure that he is heading, and the navigator continues to comment on the demolition. 5 degrees to the left. "I'm holding, we're going higher." The brain is overloaded with small commands. Everyone looks at their own thing, no one sees the big picture. At an altitude of about 200 meters, the wind subsides. The compensation calculated for the demolition now pushes the plane even further to the right. The liner is shifting away from the axis of the runway, but the cabin does not notice this. The navigator is guided by KLM 90B GPS, not by radio beacon data. The system is outdated, non-certified, and shows a slightly shifted direction. 2339. The navigator reports, 5 degrees to the left, hold, a little higher. The commander replies, I got it. But in fact, they are already below the glide path. The decrease continues at a rate of 5.5 meters per second. Now it's less than 200 meters to the ground. The crew does not see the lane, but it does not stop entering. They still have the feeling that lights are about to appear, and everything will come together. Instead, there is darkness ahead, and to the right are the lights of the village, which, because of the haze, seem straight, like runway lights. The brain takes them as a goal. From that moment on, the plane is no longer flying towards the airport, but slightly to the right, towards the highway and the houses of the demon. But no one in the cockpit knows about it. They trust the devices, and the devices are more important than the eyes. 23 hours, 39 minutes, and 30 seconds. The height is about 150 meters. The plane is still in the clouds. This is the boundary where the crew is required to see the ground, or, according to the instructions, immediately go to the second round. But there are no lights, only a uniform gray haze, in which even the flashes of navigation are lost. The navigator must give two commands: assessment, at the height of visual control, and decision, when it's time to either sit down or leave. But these words never come out. He continues to dictate the parameters, as if everything is normal. Distance 2, height 110. Fedorov peers into the darkness. His eyes are strained, pupils dilated, sweat glistens on his forehead. But his voice is calm. I don't see it yet. I'm watching. The Near-Earth Warning System, GPWS, is silent for now. At an altitude of 110 meters, this is the decision point. Instead of leaving, the commander holds the helm. He is sure that the lights will appear from second to second. The co-pilot is silent, although he was obliged to voice the command. Steep descent. But the authority of the commander in this cabin is too great. Karyakin is waiting for an initiative from above. The descent continues. The vertical speed is more than 5 meters per second. The course still goes to the right. The navigator does not notice the displacement. His navigation relies on outdated GPS, and the beacon data is ignored. Fedorov is trying to see the streak, but the light he sees ahead is not the runway and the streetlights of the demon. Because of the fog, they seem to be an even chain, just like the approach lights. At 23 hours and 40 minutes, the GPWS dry signal in the headphones is triggered. Terrain, terrain. Pull up. This is the last frontier. The commander must immediately take the aircraft up, add thrust and lift the nose. But this is not happening. Fedorov answers quietly, almost calmly. I don't see the lane yet. These are the last recorded words. He does not announce his decision to leave. He continues to look ahead, looking for light through the gray veil. The navigator, who is in a mild stage of alcoholic intoxication, keeps a report on the instruments, without noticing that the liner is already below the calculated trajectory. The co-pilot still does not interfere. The whole cabin is subordinated to one will. It is this psychological vacuum, the silence where the team should be, that becomes the point of no return. The flight mechanic starts counting the altitude using the radio altimeter. 70, 60, 50. Fedorov pulls the steering wheel, trying to feel visual contact. At 60 meters, the GPWS gives the signal again. There is no reaction. The navigator peers into the darkness. The distance is 1.5 kilometers, he says. This is no longer an estimate, it is a mistake. The decline is going too fast. The course is to the right of the axis. The height is below all acceptable minimums. But no one realizes that they are not flying over the runway. There are trees under them. Fedorov is still trying to see the landmarks. There's only one thing in my head. Just a little more. He knows that if he stops now, he will have to repeat the call. And they're almost there. This moment is a conflict of rationality and instinct, when experience defeats instruction. It is here, in these last few meters, that Flight 9605 finally loses its chance to return to the second round. Right now, it's not devices or logic that are driving it, but the belief that the band is about to appear. But instead there are treetops. It's only 30 meters to the ground. 23 hours, 40 minutes, and 2 seconds. The GPWS system is working again. The short, disturbing voice of the machine breaks the silence of the cabin. Terrain, terrain, pull up. The Earth is close. At this point, according to the instructions, the commander must instantly increase thrust, lift his nose and go for a second lap. But this is not happening. Fedorov speaks softly. I can't see it yet. I'm looking. A second later, the signal repeats. Pull up. Pull up. The voice of the machine is getting louder, but no one answers. The height is 60 meters. The plane is traveling at a vertical speed of about 5 meters per second. The course is still shifted to the right. There is a forest under the wings. Navigation lights reflect off the haze, creating the illusion of a flat surface. The commander's brain says, everything is under control. The reality is different. The mechanic continues counting down. 50, 40, 30. These numbers sound faster and faster. There is intense breathing in the cabin. Everyone understands that the altitude is critical, but no one says the command leave. It's too late. The crew is trapped in their own decision. 23 hours, 40 minutes, and 4 seconds. The first blow. The right wing grazes the treetops. The sound was muffled, as if someone had abruptly pulled out a piece of metal. The aircraft loses part of its half wing, and the angle of attack increases instantly. Fyodorov instinctively pulls the steering wheel all the way down. The Tu-134 turns up its nose, but the aerodynamics have already been destroyed. The right bank increases. The thrust of the engines increases. It's too late. The left wing loses lift, and the liner literally falls to the right. The mechanic shouts, "Roll to the right." The navigator tries to orient himself by the instruments, but the arrows jump randomly. The signal is lost. 23 hours, 40 minutes, and 6 seconds. The second blow. The plane clings to trees with its body, loses its tail section. The cabin fills with vibration. The indicators go off one by one. Fedorov tries to keep the car on course, but the steering wheels no longer obey. At this moment, the airliner is moving at a speed of about 280 km/h, at an altitude of less than 30 meters. Outside, there are flashes of fire, sparks from severed wires and burst tanks. The fuselage breaks in half, but the engines are still running for a few seconds. The roar intensifies to its maximum. 23 hours, 40 minutes, and 8 seconds. Last contact. The plane hits the parapet of the A-133 road, just 1 kilometer from the Petrozavodsk runway. Shock overload is instantaneous. The body turns almost upside down. The fuel system bursts a flash. A fiery glow rises over the village of Bezovets. The signal on the Petrozavodsk HSE radar disappears. Dispatcher Shmatkov calls, "Flight 9605, respond." Silence. Repeat one more time. Silence. On the airport platform, someone notices a flash over the horizon. At first, they think it's a thunderstorm, but a second later, calls start coming from the village. Something is burning by the road. The plane crashed. Passengers closer to the tail feel an explosion, a strong jolt and darkness. Some survive. They are pulled out by the locals, while the rescuers are rushing from the airfield. The fire spot is visible for several kilometers. The first fire truck arrives in a minute and a half. The flames are already covering half of the wreckage. Noise, crackling, the smell of kerosene, wet grass underfoot. Rescuers carry out those who show signs of life, dragging them away from the flames to the road. The characters of that night will then say, "We were just doing what we had to do." Night, forest, light rain. A moment later, a rumble breaks the silence, turning into a rumble. The ground is shaking, and the air is flashing bright orange. RusAir Tu-134, Flight 9605. It hits the ground almost upside down, at a speed of about 280 kilometers per hour. The huge mass of metal continues to move. The fuselage breaks like a tin can, scattering debris along the side of the A-133 highway. The wings with the remaining fuel burst into flames, and in seconds the entire right side of the liner is engulfed in flames. Fuel flows through the grass, and the fire runs along the ground like a wick. Local residents of the village of Bezovets see a flash from the windows. One woman runs out into the yard and shouts, "The plane! A plane crashed!" After a couple of minutes, people are running there with lanterns and buckets of water. Some are in a state of shock. The flames are only 20 meters from the houses. The bus driver, who was returning from duty, gets to the place first. He sees debris, hears metal cracking, and in the distance, a scream. The surviving passenger gets out of the wrecked cabin. His hands are burned and his clothes are covered in soot, but he is moving, calling for help from others. The flames are raging, but local men, without waiting for rescuers, pull people out from under the fuselage. The engines are still hot. There is acrid smoke in the air, the smell of kerosene and burning paint. One of the rescuers would later say, "We were pulling on the hands without seeing the faces, just shadows on fire." 1.5 minutes after impact, the first fire truck from the airport arrives at the scene. They pour foam directly onto the burning wreckage, shielding rescuers from the heat. The Petrozavodsk dispatcher reports to the service. Flight 9605. The Fall of the Devil. There is silence on the airport platform. Those who were on duty at that shift later recalled how the fiery glow was reflected in the windows of the control room. The flames die down only after 20 minutes. There is a dark footprint on the ground, almost 150 meters long, and at the end is the black skeleton of the fuselage. Only fragments of the wing, pieces of seats and burnt suitcases remained from the plane. Rescuers inspect the place. Some of the survivors are already being taken to the Petrozavodsk hospital. Some are found a meter from the road. They were thrown back by the blast wave. Those who were closer to the tail got a chance that decided everything. The fire has been extinguished, but steam is rising above the wreckage. Smoke, rain, and kerosene mist have mixed into one smell that cannot be forgotten later. An alarm is being sounded at Petrozavodsk airport. Dispatcher Shmakov is wearing headphones, still calling the flight. Flight 9605, please respond. There is a void on the air. Later, the official report says, the plane collapsed completely and caught fire at a distance of 1,200 meters from the runway. But behind this line there are people running in the dark, children standing at the windows, and the soft rustle of rain on the remains of the wing. The next morning, journalists, investigators, and the military will be at the crash site. But tonight, the scene of the tragedy is illuminated only by the headlights of fire trucks and flames. A few hours after the crash, an operational group of the Interstate Aviation Committee arrived at the scene. The site near the A133 road has already been cordoned off. Investigators, firefighters, military, journalists. A huge patch of ash, twisted metal, and in the middle of it is a piece of a wing with the letters RusAir partially visible. The work began immediately. Fixation, measurements, analysis of the location of the debris. The black boxes were found quickly. They turned out to be surprisingly intact, despite the heat and destruction. By the morning of June 21st, they were already being transported to Moscow, to the decryption laboratory. The investigation promised to be difficult. There was no obvious technical failure. The plane was in good working order before the flight, and communication with the crew was not interrupted until the very end. A few days later, experts confirmed that the engines were working properly, and so were the control systems. No fire in the air. So the reason is in the actions of people. The cockpit recordings showed that the crew did not decide to leave for the second lap, despite the lack of visual contact and repeated GPWS signals. Mack described it dryly but accurately. The cause of the disaster was a descent below the minimum safe altitude in the absence of visual contact with the ground and approach lights. But there is a whole system of errors behind this formulation. The first is the unsatisfactory interaction of the crew. The commander succumbed to the influence of navigator-instructor Amandurda Ativ, who showed increased activity and actually led the approach. Ativ was in a mild stage of alcoholic intoxication. The tests confirmed this. He dictated the commands, and Fedorov, contrary to the hierarchy, often followed them without checking. The second is the removal of the co-pilot from the control loop. Karyakin hardly interfered in the process. He did not give a single command to leave or take control. For the Commission, this was an example of a violation of the CRM management of crew resources. The third is an incorrect assessment of weather conditions. The actual weather in Petrozavodsk did not meet RusAir's operational minimum. Visibility was lower, cloud cover was below the acceptable level. Nevertheless, the commander decided to continue the flight, without requesting an updated forecast or considering an alternate airfield. The fourth is the technical and infrastructural limitations of the airport. There was no full-fledged beacon group on runway number 1, and the runway lights were faded, which could easily be confused with the lighting of the village of Bezovets. The landing system did not provide accurate vertical navigation, and the crew did not have certified precision approach facilities. The fifth is the ergonomics of the cabin of the old Tu-134. The location of the instruments required constant switching of attention, The load on the pilot was high, and visual control of the course and altitude was inconvenient during manual piloting. Combined with nighttime and fog, the horizon perception error has become almost inevitable. And finally, the human factor of the company. The investigation revealed that RusAir was under pressure from the customer at that time. The charter had to be completed on schedule. Canceling the flight or delaying it would mean a fine and reputational loss. The decision to fly was convenient, not safe but profitable. When the commission completed the analysis, almost 20 points of violations appeared in the report, ranging from incorrect procedures to the lack of necessary documents in the cabin. On September 19, 2011, the IAC published its final report. He confirmed, the crash occurred in controlled flight, with full control of the aircraft by the crew, but with an incorrect assessment of altitude and course. Technically, everything was fine. Psychologically, it is destroyed. This disaster was one of the last, where the old Tu-134 operated a passenger flight in Russia. After the IAC report, President Dmitry Medvedev instructed the Ministry of Transport, consider the possibility of decommissioning this type from regular service. When the investigation completed the first examinations, the case of Flight 9605 moved from the aviation to the legal plane. The investigative committee opened a criminal case under Article 263 of the Criminal Code of the Russian Federation. Violation of the rules of traffic safety and operation of air transport. The wording is standard, but there is a whole chain of questions behind it. Who exactly broke the rules? Pilots? Dispatchers? The system? While the investigators were sorting out the details, days of mourning began in Petrozavodsk. On June 22, 23 and 24, 2011, bells sounded over the city, flags are at half-mast, and there are flowers and candles at the airport building. The celebration of the City Day, scheduled for June 25th, was cancelled. On the central square there are photos of the crew and passengers, some with smiling faces taken just a day before the flight. At the same time, a discussion began in Moscow on whether to permanently remove the Tu-134 from passenger lines. President Dmitry Medvedev instructed the Ministry of Transport to consider this as soon as possible. For the public, the Tu-134 has become a symbol of an outdated era, outwardly reliable but morally worn out. And the disaster near Petrozavodsk was the final push. The investigation lasted more than a year. Gradually, the defendants in the case became not only representatives of the crew, but also officials responsible for the security of the Petrozavodsk airport. The investigation found that the lights of the strip did not meet the standards, and the meteorological equipment provided inaccurate data on the lower edge of the clouds. In addition, the airport lacked a full-fledged beacon system, which directly affected the difficulty of entry. The materials of the case against 3 officials, employees of the Federal Air Transport Agency and the airport, were allocated to a separate proceeding. This is Eduard Voikovsky, as well as representatives of Petrozavodsk Airport, Vladimir Shkarupa and Vladimir Pronin. They were accused of negligence and violation of flight safety standards. In July 2015, the prosecutor's office approved the indictment, and 2 years later, in February 2017, the trial began. The state prosecution has requested real terms. For Voikovsky, 6 years. For Shkarupa, 5.5. For Pronin, 5. Everything is in the colony settlement. But the court ruled otherwise. In March 2017, all 3 were found guilty and sentenced to 5 years of probation. There is also an amnesty, release from punishment and removal of criminal record. For the relatives of the victims, this decision was a cold blow. They said, those responsible have been found, but no one has been punished. Meanwhile, a wave of inspections has begun in Russia. Airlines were required to review crew access to flights in difficult weather conditions, and airports were required to modernize lighting equipment. Since 2012, the Tu-134 has stopped flying on regular routes. Many of the cars were decommissioned. Some were sent to educational centers and museums. Its characteristic whistling of engines can no longer be heard in the Karelian sky. But the memory of Flight 9605 remains. For investigators, this is an example of a system error. For pilots, it is a reminder that even experience and confidence cannot replace discipline and cold calculation. And for those who lived in Bezevets, it is a sound that cannot be forgotten. Exactly 1 year later, on June 20, 2012, in the suburbs of Petrozavodsk, near the village of Bezevets, the opening ceremony of the memorial took place. In the place where fire and metal broke out then, there is now a stone platform lined with light granite. In the middle is a burnt wing, reconstructed from real fragments of the Tu-134. A metallic carnation flower bursts out of it, a symbol of the explosion that once split the silence of the night. A flock of 47 birds soars over the wing. According to the death toll, every bird has a name. On the wall behind the memorial are fragments of the fuselage with portholes, each with a plaque with the name of the person who did not return from that flight. The ceremony was attended by relatives, pilots, rescuers, and the very locals, who were the first to rush to the burning plane that night. They didn't consider themselves heroes. They just couldn't help it. The memorial is quiet. Only the wind from the lake and the occasional rustle of leaves. But for those who were nearby at that time, this silence is louder than any sounds. The disaster of Flight 9605 has become a watershed. After that, the reform in the field of CRM management of crew resources began. Now every crew member must have the right and duty to intervene if the commander's decision seems wrong. Hierarchy has given way to team responsibility. In addition, meteorological minimums for small airfields were revised. Strip lighting requirements were introduced, and aircraft were required to be equipped with modern navigation systems. No little thing should depend on the eye anymore. RusAir soon ceased to exist. The company, for which this flight was a regular order, was not prepared for the cost of the error. The fleet was decommissioned, the licenses were cancelled, the brand disappeared, but the memory of it remained in reports and training programs. Since then, every pilot safety class in Russia and the CIS has featured an example. Petrozavodsk, Flight 9605. This is not just a disaster, but a learning case about how a chain of small things, from the weather and discipline to the character of people, it can lead to a fatal outcome. Every year on June 20th, relatives, residents, and pilots gather at the site of the tragedy. They bring flowers, light candles at the metal wing, and read the names. No one makes loud speeches, just short words of gratitude and remembrance. Where once there was a flash of fire, now there is a reflection of light, and a reminder that there are no small things in aviation. Every decision, every glance at the device, every second of doubt, is a life that can be saved. And while modern planes are flying over Karelia, their pilots know that there is a place down on the side of the old A133 highway where they will remember the mistake forever. The place where the air still stores the sound of the last engine. A Flight 9605.